Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, the system is rigged. Markets are rigged. The vote is rigged. Rigged, 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 they say, but who are the riggers? Who gets to draw up the lists? The list not only of the deplorables, but the list of the tolerables, the acceptables. Who writes these lists? Does Stacey write the lists? Possibly. Let's ask her. Stacey, do you write these lists?
I have one name on my list.
Okay.
So yes, everybody in America is saying that the elections are rigged. Hillary Clinton says that Russia is going to rig the elections. Trump says Hillary is rigging the polls across states across the U.S. The Podesta emails show that Hillary, in fact, did say to banks and bankers in private that she believes the system is rigged, and gosh darn it, Bernie Sanders is capitalizing on that. And how do we stop him from saying this publicly when it should only be private amongst us political elite and you elite bankers who know that the system is rigged? So rigging is something that's really in the population's mind. And yet they still go out and vote. And I want to really provide some sort of historical context to this, because in the Podesta emails, one of the shocking things is that in 2008, when John Podesta was the transition team guy for Obama. So he helped pick who would be in the cabinet. It turns out that Citigroup actually selected Obama's transition team. So I want to go back to 2 years ago, because I have a memory and also access to Twitter. And somebody linked to this from Twitter.
I had a memory. Now I just have social media.
So in 2014, Michael J. Glennon, who is an insider, who was a legal counsel to the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. He was also a counsel to the State Department and an advisor to various committees in Congress. So he's a very connected guy. And he wrote a book called National Security and Double Government. And he maintains, here's the headline from Boston Globe regarding his book, written in 2014, by the way, before everybody admonished Trump for saying the election is rigged. Vote all you want, the secret government won't change. So he notes that, voters chose Barack Obama in 2008. For hope and change. He ran on basically a civil liberties platform, that he would shut down all those bad, evil things that George Bush did, like spying on Americans and locking people up at Guantanamo Bay. And then he noticed that everybody 6 years in, at the point of this Boston Globe interview, 6 years in, everybody was like, wait, it's completely the same thing as George Bush's administration. In fact, the drone war escalated. Guantanamo Bay was not shut down. The NSA spying became more aggressive. So he says, why did the face in the Oval Office change, but the policies remain the same? Critics tend to focus on Obama himself, a leader who perhaps has shifted with politics to take a harder line. But Tufts University political scientist Michael J. Glennon has a more pessimistic answer. Obama could not have changed policies even if he tried, because, he says, of the double government. There's a government that you choose, he says. There's the one we elect, and then there's the one behind it.
Okay, so they're using the term double government instead of shadow government or new world order.
Yeah.
There's a term now called double government.
Yeah.
Okay, double government.
So he comes up with this term, double government.
Okay, it's the double government. It's not the shadow government. It's not the cabal. It's not the Rothschilds. It's not New World Order. It's not Alex Jones. It's the double government.
It's the double government.
Okay.
Well, so remember, this guy was an insider, Michael J. Glennon, and he actually says it's more benign. It's just a sort of accidental. They're all nice people, these double government people, the bureaucrats behind the scene that are permanent, that stay there, that they all are individually nice people, but collectively, the fact that you can't change the outcome through your vote is sort of menacing, he says. Elected officials end up serving as a mere cover, he says, for the real decisions made by the bureaucracy. So this bread and circuses of the election every 4 years is just bread and circuses. It's our modern day where we think we have any play in the outcome, and he's saying we don't. And here is an insider who should know.
Oh, this is the arc of history supports this bifurcation, this two-tier system, going back to the medieval days. There was lords and serfs. Then you had the Enlightenment, and you had the printing press, and you had the dissemination of knowledge. You had the disruption of the church as the guiding force of both society and all of its discontents. But then you had the American Revolution, which was government by and for the people, and that was a new concept in governance that had not really been seen. It was taking the best from different eras and historically took from the Greeks and the Romans and the French, and they put together the rights of man, and they put together the brilliance of the founding fathers, and the shining city on the hill was there for many decades, 100 years or more. But then the corruption of the Europeans that America successfully revolted from. America effectively detached from. The Bank of England, for example, was outlawed in America until 1913, when they brought in the central bank. The Federal Reserve Bank was a clone of the Bank of England. So that was the beginning of the end. So here we are in 2013, 14, 15, 100 years later, and they're finally, the central bankers have won. It's no surprise the central bankers picked the cabinet for Obama.
We're going to go into that because now you could argue that Obama at that time, when he became president in 2008, was kind of ignorant of this double government because he had only been a one-term senator, whereas Hillary Clinton is very clear in her emails that have been leaked. Many in the Beltway are saying, well, it shows how pragmatic and just a normal politician she is. But what she's quite clear about there is that there is one thing to say to the ignorant masses, the lumpen masses, and there's another thing to say in private to the likes of Lloyd Blankfein. And they quite clearly mock and laugh at the activists, at people who care about the vote, people who think their vote can have any sort of say in the outcome. And in fact, Michael J. Glennon, in this interview with the Boston Globe back in 2014, when he asked, well, is there anything to do to stop this double government? And he does bring up that knowledge.
Look, Adam Smith and the Age of Enlightenment and the beginning of classical economics and the idea that you could create price discovery through the greed of all participants in something called the free market worked for a while. But now, to get to your point about rigging, the cost of market rigging and vote rigging has crashed. So it's never been easier for an individual or a small group, a cadre, to rig markets, rig votes, and rig the system.
So he's saying that rigged system requires knowledge and non-ignorance and non-asymmetric information. Information should not be asymmetric. Hillary Clinton clearly demonstrates in her conversations to the bankers that information is asymmetric, in that only they in private can discuss how rigged the system is. Do not tell the public. And what he says when asked how to change the system, he said the ultimate problem is the pervasive political ignorance on the part of the American people and indifference to the threat that is emerging from these concealed institutions. That is where the energy for reform has to come from, the American people, not from government. Government is very much the problem here. The people have to take the bull by the horns, and that's a very difficult thing to do because the ignorance is in many ways rational. There is very little profit to be had in learning about and being active about problems that you cannot affect, policies that you can't change. Again, I say that this sort of understanding is revealed very much in Hillary Clinton's private conversations with bankers when, for example, when she was openly saying, I support fracking, I went around the world supporting fracking, and on the campaign trail, she tells the people, I will not allow fracking, I don't want fracking here, but in her private conversations with bankers, she was saying that people who are against fracking should just get a life.
Well, we're moving from a corporal reality of the physical being to one of pure etherealization of the. Now, look, remember back in the first Clinton presidency, they had the bond vigilantes. You know, the economy was held in check by bond sellers who would force interest rates up if it looked like Bill Clinton was doing the wrong thing. But then the central banks came in and they became the bond market, and now they're gone. Now you have only the Forex market, which is punishing Britain for its stupid Brexit decision, but to attempt to co-opt the entire Forex market, which is a $5 trillion a day market, you're going to see the debt of the globe expand exponentially once again.
So again, going back to this double government thing, that your vote doesn't matter.
Managed by the double government.
And the rigged system. Well, here is another revelation from the WikiLeaks release of the Podesta emails. And the headline reads, the most important WikiLeaks revelation isn't about Hillary Clinton. What John Podesta's emails from 2008 reveal about the way power works and the Democratic Party. But of course, as Michael J. Glennon pointed out, this is about all of the political parties in America. And what they show is that Michael Froman, who is now the U.S. Trade Representative, and he goes around negotiating TTIP and TPP and stuff. But at that point, he was an executive at Citigroup, one of the largest banks in America. And this was written in an email October 6, 2008, one full month before you went out to express your democratic rights to determine who the president, who the policies, what the future of your country would be, at least for the next 4 years. Well, October 6th, and about 2 months before Citigroup received the largest bailout in U.S. history, well, Michael Froman at Citigroup sent an email to John Podesta, who was heading Obama's transition team into the White House, i.e. he would choose his cabinet. Well, Michael Froman, Citigroup, sent an email telling him who the cabinet should be. And remarkably, the cabinet list ended up being almost entirely on the money. It correctly identified Eric Holder for Justice, Janet Napolitano for Homeland Security, Robert Gates for Defense, Rahm Emanuel for Chief of Staff, Peter Orszag for the Office of Management and Budget, Arnie Duncan for Education, Eric Shinesky for Veterans Affairs, Kathleen Sebelius for Health and Human Services, Melody Barnes for the Domestic Policy Council, and more. For the Treasury, 3 possibilities were on the list: Robert Rubin, Larry Summers, and Timothy Geithner.
So Citibank picked the cabinet.
Citigroup picked the cabinet. It appears it would appear.
Yeah.
Perhaps they were on the same page, being in private rooms of the elite, but it seems they chose the cabinet just as Michael Glennon warned the people in 2014.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the whole Barack Obama's presidency is been a sham in that regard, in that he's done nothing but kowtow to the worst elements of the banking industry in Wall Street.
What it's saying is that as everybody's very excited to go and vote, perhaps there is some truth in what Trump is saying in terms of the election being rigged, but not in the way he's suggesting. But as an outsider, perhaps he doesn't understand how the power maintains itself.
Well, Hillary winning the presidency, I'm pretty sure she's going to impose pretty draconian restrictions on speech.
The point is, the media is very close to Podesta, as we've seen. The emails also reveal that. The media right now is focusing on every vulgarity uttered from Donald Trump, and he does utter many vulgarities, and that is all that they talk about. Nobody is asking her what her head of the transition team is, Ken Salazar. Nobody's asking, well, have you received your list yet, and who is on that list? It should be in the interest of the American population whether or not they want that list for her cabinet, who is deciding it. Is it Goldman Sachs? Is it J.P. Morgan? Is it, Halliburton? Who knows?
Well said. I mean, the rigging carries on unabated. Well, we got to go to the second half. So stay tuned. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time to go back to New York and talk to Dr. Michael Hudson, author of many books, including his new one, out in just a few weeks. J is for Junk Economics. Michael, welcome back.
It's good to be here, Max.
Yeah, it's all, people are looking for a Christmas gift. They should, get ready for this. I can't think of a better thing to see under the Christmas tree than J is for Junk Economics by Dr. Michael Hudson. You make a lot of people quite happy, including Santa Claus. Now, let's talk about the book, Dr. Michael Hudson. J is for Junk Economics. What is that all about?
Well, it's about the fact that mainstream economics ignores the kind of thing that you talk about on your show. It ignores debt. It's based on equilibrium theory. It forecasts basically is that all the debts can be paid if only you lower wages enough and if you sell off enough of the public domain to pay the bondholders. So mainstream economics is really how to sacrifice the economy to pay the bondholders. And it's not how economics works. And in fact, it didn't used to be how economics works. So what I do is I contrast the classical economics of Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and the others with today. And their idea of free market was a market that was free from predatory finance, free from landlords, free from economic rent, and free from unearned income. And today's economics follows Milton Friedman, who says there's no such thing as a free lunch. But as your viewers know, the economy is all about how to get a free lunch. The economy is all about how Wall Street's ripping off the economy and how the billionaires today aren't really creating jobs, they're destroying jobs. That's how they become richer billionaires. So you have a contrast between what economic theory says and reality economics, how the world really works.
You mentioned equilibrium theory. I want to stay on that for a second. So in other words, if people read the financial press here in the UK or in the US, a lot of times when the going gets tough, let's say people realize that Brexit is a colossal failure and a mistake, you'll find somebody in the Telegraph will write an editorial, Evans Pritchard, for example, where they'll pull out some equilibrium theory, that, well, you don't understand. According to this equilibrium theory, blah, blah, blah. This is a great way to mask failure, is by putting an equal sign in amongst a bunch of gobbledygook and call that economics. As you point out, there was a pre-period in economics where stuff was to protect us from these charlatans. And then now they've taken over, right?
That's what they do. Equilibrium means if there's any adjustment, everything goes back to normal. And the reality, any mathematician who looks at economics, who's not trained in economics, realizes that when there's a disturbance, when something gets out of balance, it gets more and more out of balance until there's a crisis. You've had Steve Keen on your show, and he's a good mathematician, and he points this out, that the junk economics uses junk mathematics. And it's all based on diminishing returns. For instance, all the textbooks that you're trained in talk about marginal utility theory. And the idea is if you get more and more apples or wealth, you're satiated and it becomes less important to you. But the fact is, already in the ancient Greeks, they knew about wealth addiction. They know that if once you get wealthy, you have more and more of an addiction to wealth. You have more and more of a drive for it. It's just exactly the opposite from diminishing marginal utility. Also, the statistics that junk economics uses, it assumes there's no such thing as exploitation. There's no unproductive labor. There's no free lunch. It's as if they now treat crime as part of the gross national product. In fact, in Italy just begun reporting crime as part of output because it said, well, that's the market. If we're talking about the market, let's talk about the embezzlement, the robbery, all the other things. So there's a whole mushiness over what does it mean to have output. If we're going to have Goldman Sachs and the financial sector taking interest, is this really what we want? Is that output or is it paid for out of industry and labor? I'll give you an example of Greece. Suppose that a country owes debt equal to 100% of its GDP. Now, if the interest rate is 5% and the country is growing only at 2%, then all of the economic growth, all of the growth up to the interest rate has to be paid to the creditors. And since right now, Europe and America are only growing at 1 or 2%, and the interest rate that people have to pay on their mortgages, credit cards, companies are much higher, all of the growth in the American and European economy is going really to the financial sector, and that's the 1%. Now, the orthodox economics, like even Mr. Piketty, with all of his statistics, he says, well, it must be inherited wealth, that's the problem. But the real problem is not that wealth is inherited, it's that all the wealth is financialized. It's all going to pay the banks and the real estate investors and the insurance company and what the national income statistics call the FIRE sector, finance, insurance, and real estate. And if you subtract the FIRE sector from GDP, you find out actually that the European and American economies have been shrinking steadily in the last decade, not growing at all. It's an illusion that there's growth. there's actually been shrinking, and you don't get this in the mainstream economics, and that's why it's basically a kind of public relations for Wall Street.
I've often thought about this, that as you acquire wealth, the risk of acquiring more wealth diminishes. And when people talk about, the way I resolve this in my own thinking is that when people talk about wealth redistribution, they'd be better served to talk about risk redistribution. In other words, for the wealthy, their cost of funds should not go down, they should actually go up to make some equilibrium, if there's true equilibrium in the economy. And also, let me go out on a limb here. You talked about Greece and what was the thinking back in ancient times. Didn't Aristotle have a parable about olive trees or about one olive tree was good, two was great, but three was too many or something? Did I dream that, or is that based in reality somewhere?
I don't remember Aristotle saying that. I know that Aristotle did talk about people, when people begin to get wealthy, they became addicted to it, and they wanted more and more and more. And the Greeks had a word for it, pleonexia, too much of a surplus. And the whole Greek concept of hubris was not only arrogance of wealth, but arrogance that injured other people. So the vocabulary that Aristotle used recognizes that hubris and arrogance and wealth involves an injury to other people. And that was why it was bad. So it's not just that wealth is something positive. There's a negative side of the balance sheet. And if wealth has come by exploiting other people, by reducing them to bondage, by reducing them, ultimately to serfdom, that's not real wealth at all. That's simply economic polarization.
Right. And contrast that with one of Warren Buffett's favorite quotes from Mae West. Too much of a great thing is great, is not enough. So clearly a complete contrast in thinking. Now, to follow up on this point, you talk about the myth of the banker god is the hardest for all of myths for the population to give up, that the financial sector is a necessary part of production and consumption. But you kind of disagree with this. But the banker god, this is part of this, correct?
Well, yeah. In 2008, the bank said, in order to save the economy, you have to save us. And the reality is that the economy had a choice back in 2008. Either it could save the banks and the bondholders by sacrificing Ireland to pay the crooked banks, sacrificing Greece, sacrificing the 10 million American homeowners, or it could save the economy. And what the banks really said was, you need us not to shut down your ATM machines. We're going to create a crisis and take away your means of payment because you don't have a public option. You need us private banks because you have not put in place a fail-safe position so that a public bank can really provide the means of payment if we declare war on you, and we're holding you up for hostage, for ransom. If you don't give us everything we want and bail out the banks for bad losses on their junk mortgage loans and their fraudulent loans and their derivative ripoffs, then they'll close down the economy. And that doesn't mean that you need the banks. It means that the banks have a chokehold on you.
So the governor of Minnesota, who is a Democrat, has said that Obamacare is officially unaffordable for the state. 5% of the population will face a full premium price rise of 60% for 2017. What happens next for Obamacare?
It's going to become more and more expensive. I was the economist for Dennis Kucinich when he ran in 2008. And he tried to get in Congress the public option, and the Democratic Leadership Committee, both from Pelosi and from in the Senate, would not even permit a public option to be discussed in Congress. So it was a giveaway to the pharmaceutical industries that had paid these politicians huge amounts of corrupt money. Just to guarantee that Obamacare was going to make the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies and the stockholders behind them, mainly the 1%, very, very rich. And you had early in the presidential campaign, Trump coming out and saying, hey, a public option obviously is the more efficient. Bernie Sanders was right. But now he's turned around and accused falsely Hillary of supporting a public option, when you can be sure neither candidate is going to support the public option. They're all in the hands of the insurance industry. And so between banking and healthcare, health insurance, and real estate, the average worker in America doesn't have very much money to buy goods and services, and that's why the economy is shrinking. That's why employment's shrinking, and that's why the employment that is taking place is all part-time and temporary.
Well, we've got about 20 seconds left. So the current debt in America officially is approaching $20 trillion. Is there an end to that? We've only got about 10 seconds, but can that just keep going?
Yes, it can't be paid. We're in a position of grace. There's a basic principle: debts that can't be paid won't be. The question is, how won't they be paid? Will it be by foreclosure and concentration of the 1%, or will it be a debt write-down?
All right, we got to cut her off there. Dr. Michael Hudson, thanks for being on the show.
Good to be here.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Michael Hudson. His new book is called J is for Junk Economics. It'll be out around Thanksgiving. It makes a great Christmas gift. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.